In the first quarter of 2026, satellite imagery picked up something mathematically impossible off the coast of Karg Island. Karg Island is Iran's primary export terminal, and under the crushing weight of maximum pressure sanctions, its surrounding waters were supposed to be empty. For years, Section 1245 of the U.S. National Defense Authorization Act acted as a financial guillotine, cutting off any bank that dared touch Iranian oil. The goal was to drop Iranian exports to absolute zero, and for a while it worked, driving exports down to a trickle of just 300,000 barrels a day. But the satellites were not lying. Deep draft supertankers were loading and leaving the terminal at a relentless pace. Iran was suddenly exporting 1.56 million barrels of crude oil per day. That is the highest volume of oil leaving the country since total sanctions were reimposed in 2018. It effectively meant Iran was back to operating at peacetime levels. This surge wasn't a failure of American intelligence, it was an intentional blind eye. Behind closed doors, the United States had quietly extended a series of highly controversial waivers, green-lighting the transfer of roughly $10 billion in frozen Iranian funds held in countries like Oman and Iraq. The United States was deliberately unlocking billions of dollars for its most hostile adversary in the region. To the casual observer, Washington appeared to be directly funding the very military apparatus it spends billions of tax dollars trying to counter. It makes absolutely no sense. But the reason the United States had to swallow this bitter pill has nothing to do with Iran. It has entirely to do with the fragile physics of global logistics. To understand the American concession, you have to look at a map of the Persian Gulf. At the southeastern edge of the Gulf lies the Strait of Hormuz. It is a geographic choke point connecting the oil-rich Middle East to the open waters of the Arabian Sea and the broader global market. At its absolute narrowest point, the strait is just 39 kilometers or 21 nautical miles wide. But the physical width is deceptive. Because the waters are shallow and littered with small islands, the actual navigable shipping lanes for massive supertankers are incredibly restricted. The inbound lane is just 2 miles wide. The outbound lane is also 2 miles wide. They are separated by a 2-mile buffer zone to prevent catastrophic collisions. Into this tiny 4-mile-wide strip of navigable water, the global economy pours an unfathomable amount of energy. Every single day, roughly 21 million barrels of oil transit through the Strait of Hormuz. That represents a staggering 21% of the entire world's petroleum liquids consumption. In addition, a quarter of the global liquefied natural gas trade, primarily from Qatar, moves through these exact same 4 miles. There is no viable alternative. The East-West pipeline in Saudi Arabia can only bypass a fraction of this volume, and it is operating near capacity. This geography gives Iran, which controls the entire northern coastline of the strait, a disproportionate amount of geopolitical leverage. If the American sanctions were to actually succeed, if Iranian exports were truly forced to zero and the regime's economy collapsed into total domestic ruin, Iran would have absolutely nothing left to lose. Their ultimate, desperate trump card is military blockade. By deploying thousands of cheap naval mines, utilizing swarms of fast attack craft from the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, or firing anti-ship missiles from the coast, Iran could effectively close the strait. Closing Hormuz wouldn't just be an act of war, it would be a localized action that instantly severs a fifth of the world's energy supply, creating an immediate, catastrophic logistical shockwave across the planet. When a choke point like Hormuz closes, the immediate financial shock is felt not at the gas pump, but in underwriting offices thousands of miles away in London. Before a very large crude carrier, or VLCC, even enters a high-risk zone, its owners must secure war risk insurance from syndicates at Lloyd's of London. During standard operations, this premium sits around 0.05% of the ship's hull value. But the moment a blockade or active hostilities commence, that rate historically skyrockets to 5% or higher. A modern VLCC can carry 2 million barrels of oil and has a hull value of roughly $160 million. A jump to a 5% premium means the insurance alone costs $8 million for a single 7-day transit. The economics of shipping collapse instantly. Major tanker operators like Euronav and Frontline would simply refuse to send their fleets into the Gulf, regardless of the price of oil. The resulting supply vacuum would hit Asia first and hardest. China is the world's largest oil importer, bringing in over 11 million barrels a day. Roughly half of that comes directly through the Strait of Hormuz. Japan and South Korea are even more heavily reliant on Gulf transit. If Hormuz shuts down, Asian economies would be forced to panic buy oil from the only other available markets, the United States, West Africa, and the North Sea. This sudden, massive shift of Asian capital into Western markets would violently drain the American domestic oil supply. Within days, the cost of diesel in the United States would explode. And diesel is the lifeblood of logistics. If diesel prices double, the cost to operate a Union Pacific freight train doubles. The cost to drive an 18-wheeler from the port of Los Angeles to a warehouse in Nevada doubles. The final delivery of an Amazon package becomes fundamentally unprofitable. The US government would try to stabilize the market by releasing crude from the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. But in 2026, the SPR sits at roughly 360 million barrels, a historic low that is mathematically insufficient to cover a prolonged multi-month closure of Hormuz. The resulting hyperinflation would devastate domestic purchasing power, creating a political apocalypse for any sitting administration. This catastrophic domino effect is the exact scenario the United States is actively trying to prevent by looking the other way on Iranian oil exports. It is a calculation of pure economic defense. By allowing Iran to export 1.56 million barrels a day, the US government is artificially flooding the global market. In the highly volatile crude oil market, where supply and demand are balanced on a razor's edge, adding an extra million barrels a day has a massive dampening effect on prices. Market analysts estimate that this Iranian supply depresses the global price of Brent crude by anywhere from $5 to $8 a barrel. That $8 drop acts as a massive, invisible tax cut for the global economy. It lowers manufacturing costs in Europe, keeps inflation somewhat manageable in the US, and stabilizes Asian supply chains. But more crucially, by allowing the Iranian regime to earn roughly $100 million a day from these exports, the US provides them with a vital economic lifeline. As long as Iran is making billions, they have a massive financial disincentive to close the Strait of Hormuz, because doing so would cut off their own revenue stream. The alternative is going to war to keep the strait open by force, but the mathematics of military intervention are brutal. Deploying a single US carrier strike group, like the USS Gerald R. Ford, to the Persian Gulf costs roughly $7 to $8 million a day in active combat scenarios, and it wouldn't be just one carrier. A prolonged conflict involving minesweeping, aerial superiority, and protecting commercial convoys would cost the Pentagon hundreds of millions of dollars a week, while global oil prices simultaneously skyrocketed due to the conflict itself. Allowing an enemy to evade sanctions and earn billions of dollars is infuriating on a diplomatic level. But when you run the numbers, it is undeniably the cheapest option to preserve global economic stability. In the realm of international relations, public policy is often framed as a battle of moral absolutes: good versus bad, democracy versus authoritarianism. But underneath the rhetoric, geopolitics is rarely driven by ideology. It is driven by logistics, resource flow, and applied mathematics. This doctrine is known as realpolitik, politics based on practical and material factors rather than theoretical or ethical objectives. In a deeply interconnected global economy, attempting to completely destroy an enemy can sometimes backfire, causing unacceptable collateral damage to your own systems. The United States cannot afford a closed Strait of Hormuz, and therefore it cannot afford a completely cornered Iran. By turning a blind eye to the oil waivers, the United States is literally buying world peace, or at least market stability. It is not doing so through complex diplomacy or shared values. It is doing so by using the economic survival of its adversary as a buffer against total global logistical collapse. When a government is forced to choose between the moral high ground of strict sanctions and the brutal reality of the cost to ship a container across the Pacific, pragmatism always wins.